For me, as a child, I'm watching, guys like I said, Michael Jordan, the Ken Griffey Juniors, guys that, are black and doing well, not just great in their sport, but just great as ambassadors of the game. So I'm watching them and I'm proud because, they, similar skin color. I think I can do anything because they're doing it. Who I want to know who was that for you getting into wrestling? Because at the time, was there a lot of black athletes in wrestling, or
No.
what was the landscape like for you?
Well, since you saw my documentary, you'll see where, my family moved to Chardon, which was pretty much all white. There's only, there were just a few black families in the whole town. But what that did for me is it took me out of the inner city of Cleveland. I didn't really live in the inner city, but right out on the outskirts of the inner city. But I wasn't in any organized sports when I lived in Cleveland. So that was through sixth grade. So had I stayed in Cleveland, I probably would not have gotten into sports. I don't think I would have. When I think back on what my interests were then, coming out of sixth grade, unfortunately, your environment kind of pulls you into the street. Not you'd have to be doing bad stuff, but the discipline it takes to be an athlete, that's a whole nother, that's just different, And so Chardon was a farming community, big bunch of big, strong farm white kids, I guess. And my dad we bought this acreage, 25 acres of land. It was a farm, but my dad still had his job in Cleveland in a factory, so he'd drive in, but he wanted to farm that. That was a dream he had. So that's how I got there. And my dad, I come from an era where you couldn't talk back to your parents.
Yeah.
Your parents tell you to go out and do something, you go out and do it. So I was developing a sense of obedience, I guess, to authority my whole life. That's just kind of how I was raised. I got really accustomed to hard work, being on the farm. The work was really hard. It was just my dad and me. But my influence was, this is going to sound a little strange, but I went out for basketball right away when I got to Chardon, because that was the thing I was very familiar with coming from Cleveland. So, but I didn't play. And that's where it comes in about what I like to just convey about the individual nature of wrestling, where a coach doesn't decide whether you play or not. When I was on the basketball team, I always felt that I was good enough to play, but I sat on the bench for 2 straight years. I got in for about a total of 30 seconds. And it was that frustration after 2 years of that, my 9th grade year, I was ready to try something different. And I went out for basketball in 9th grade, but I was leaving the wrestling room or leaving basketball practice, dejected. And I walked by the wrestling room and I saw the guys practicing. And to me, it looked like the whole team was practicing. They were practicing. And I just loved basketball practice where I was just sitting on the bench, even in practice. So I didn't even get to play in practice. I was just always pushed on the outskirts, never played in scrimmages. And so I had some friends who were wrestlers, and they were encouraging me to go out. And the gym teacher, we had wrestling back then in high school. And so the gym teacher was the freshman wrestling coach. So he was on me. Lee, you're not wrestling. You're not playing basketball. If you come out, you're going to wrestle.
Right.
So why sit on the bench? Come out and wrestle. And I was learning some of the fundamentals in gym class. And he said, if you go out right today, you're going to wrestle this weekend because we have a match and I don't have a 138 pounder. So, and I'm thinking, I'm going to be the guy? I'm going to wear the uniform? I'm going to be the guy out there? He said, yep, if you go out. And I did. And sure enough, that weekend, man, I had a wrestling uniform on and I'm wrestling and I won my match. So that was it. I was hooked. In terms of a mentor, it was Dan Gable. You probably heard of him.
Yeah.
You saw him in my movie. He was the biggest star in America in wrestling. And he was well known throughout the world. The Russians vowed to beat him because the Russians, they don't like getting beat by Americans in anything. And Dan was consistently beating the Russians. So from my movie, you can see how my relationship with him developed. But it was him. And partly because there wasn't that many black people that were visible in the sport. The only magazine that came out from wrestling didn't have a lot of black people in there. The few that they had, I cut their pictures out, had them on my wall though.
Yeah.
Lloyd Keiser, Bobby Douglas, Jim Tannehill, Phil Parker. They were all. I mean, if I find a picture of one of those guys,
Yeah.
I had them on my wall because that's who I could relate to. And in 1973, Lloyd Keyser, he ended up going to the military academy, I think the Naval Academy, and was an All-American in wrestling, and ended up being America's first black world champion in 1973. So that was my junior year in high school, and boom, his picture was right up there.
Yeah.
And I could see him. He was winning the world championships, and that was a year after the Olympics. 1972, Gable won his Olympic Games, and Gable retired. So Lloyd Keyser was an alternate to Gable in '72. So then he finally got his chance, and he won the world championships. And so I was hooked, man. I was like, I want to be just like him, man. I know I can win a world title. And I was just in high school.